and welcome to Uncorking a Story. I'm your host, Mike Carlon, and today we have a very special episode. I mean, could you tell? If you're a child of the 80s like me, that intro music I played before the other intro music meant something to you. You know, it was when CBS had a special presentation. That's what you got. And you know, back in our day, we didn't know. We didn't have DVRs. You know, we could barely work a VCR. No, and we get excited. You know, what's it going to be? Is it going to be Frosty the Snowman? Is that it? Is it Rudolph? Or is it, I don't know, Grease? They'd play Grease a lot for some reason. CBS back in the day. Anyway, I ripped off that music from YouTube. That's what I did. So, you know, when they come and cuff me and you don't get the follow-up episode on Friday, now you know why. This is a special episode because I am interviewing my twin brother, Jimmy. He's got a new book out. It's called Conversation with a Desperate Man. And in that book, he recounts his struggles with anxiety and depression, as well as his stay in a psychiatric hospital a couple of summers ago. And I was there. I dropped him off, which was a very difficult a day for me. And just to let you know, this interview is long. And I divided it up into two parts. So the first part you're going to get today. The second part we're going to release on Friday. And it's long for a few reasons. Number one, Jim is long-winded. I mean, have you ever had a conversation with Jimmy? He likes to talk. And I'm convinced he likes to hear himself talk too. It's true. He uses a lot of big words too. If you ever had a conversation with Jimbo, a lot of big words there, a lot of SAT words. And I'm not convinced that he needs to use words of that magnitude all the time. But he does. It's like part of his personality, like the seersucker jacket he would wear whenever I'd perform comedy. It was like his thing. Anyway, I kid, but it's two parts again, long-winded, but also it's a lot to take in at once. I'll be honest with you. This story is deep. This is not one of the, happy-go-lucky Uncorking a Story episodes. This one, it's tough to hear. It's important to hear. It's very important to hear this story, but it's tough to hear. So I don't want to throw too much at you at once. So part one is today. Part two coming up later this week on Friday. Now, as I was thinking about the conversation I had with Jim, it reminded me I had this conversation with a guy named Jess Stainbrook, who is a filmmaker, won many awards. One of those kinds of filmmakers. I made Mike Slammer in high school. This guy was making documentaries about Olympic teams and being held by the KGB. But this story isn't about Jess. It's about Jim. Anyway, but Jess is the executive director of something called the Invisible Disabilities Association. And, of course, we're talking about Jim here. We're talking about depression and anxiety. And, depression is a great example of an invisible disability. For the most part, you can't see it. I mean, if you're looking for evidence of it, and you'll see it in hindsight. But when someone's going through depression, people tend to rationalize it as something else. They don't think about it as depression because they don't want to believe someone they love is depressed or struggling. At least that's my experience anyway. I don't want to speak for everybody, but I will. Jim, I knew was in an unhappy marriage. I didn't realize how much of a toll it was taking on his health, but I knew he wasn't happy. I knew the dynamic in that marriage was not great. I knew that he was struggling with a toxic work environment, but at the time, I think to myself, we all have issues at work, right? No idea how much that environment was impacting his mental health. And when his health started to fail, Jim had to make a lot of hard choices. He had to go against his own nature. And here's the thing about Jim, and this is true for me as well. We have a very difficult time putting ourselves first. The hardest questions we both can answer. If anyone ever asks me or Jim, and he'll tell you in this interview, what do you want? For some reason, it's very difficult for us to answer that. And we discussed that, in this interview. But I I had a hard time seeing how hard he was suffering, how bad he had it. And it wasn't until he asked if I would go with him to check him into a psychiatric hospital that it became really real for me. Really real. And during his time in that hospital, I was the one who the doctors called. I was the one on the consult just before his discharge. And I remember him being really mad at me during a conversation we had with his treatment team because I was challenging them, whether or not he was actually ready to come home. And finally, my eyes were finally open at how much of a struggle he was going through and how serious it was. And I didn't want them to let him go just because he decided it was time for him to leave. You know, I didn't want that because I knew unless something changed in the environment he was going back to, that nothing was going to change in his life. So I you're not happy about this, but I had to have those tough conversations. And I remember after that conversation, he's like, "What the hell are you doing? I want out of this place." And for me, it was, not so fast, grasshopper. I needed to be convinced that he had the tools, in place to do what he needed to do. But the whole point of this rambling is, and you're going to hear a lot more detail in a minute, is that we all know people. You probably know somebody. I'm sure you do, who's suffering on the inside, but doesn't show it. And like me, I never knew how badly my brother had it. But fortunately for us, he asked for help. He actually was able to become vulnerable, and ask for help. And not everyone does that. And again, if you know somebody who even suspect is struggling with depression, don't wait for them to say that they need help. Maybe just have a conversation, maybe just offer your assistance, and you're doing that may just be what they need to start addressing the problem. But here's my interview with Jim. You're going to go on an emotional roller coaster here, so heads up on that. Again, this is the first part today. Second part comes on Friday. Hope you enjoy it. And hey, without further ado, here's my conversation with Jim. Just so you know, we start by talking about the weather. We were in the middle of a blizzard here in the Northeast, and Jim was down in South Florida visiting my parents. My father and mother have both had a hard time during COVID. Dad specifically with some serious health issues, and Jim's been really a lifesaver in helping them, uh, you know, uh, get better. So that's where he is. You'll hear us talk about it a bit. And here we go. My interview with James Carlon, author of Conversation with a Desperate Man. What was mom's? Remember, she had tears of snow, a simple dusting, a few flakes, and bloody blizzard. I think.
Exactly. That was the spectrum of snowfall
Yeah.
in the household. Yeah.
We
Yeah.
have a bloody blizzard among us right now.
Absolutely.
Well, let's talk about the blizzard that is your novel. I've almost called it a novel because, well, I tell you, parts of it do read are as captivating as a novel. It is very story focused. It's called Conversation with a Desperate Man. First of all, let me just ask you this: how did you come up with that title for this book?
Wow. It was after the first time I had submitted it to the content editor that you had given me, and for the uninitiated, and I would include myself in that population of people. When you write a book and you send it through an editing process, it's not just the commas and the punctuation marks and that sort of thing. You need somebody to look at the whole architecture of the book and to give you suggestions on whether the thing actually works. I mean, is it standing up on its own? Does it need a better foundation? Does it tie together well? Are things connected well enough? And that's the content edit process. And you sent me to a guy, I was down in North Carolina or something, I don't remember, but
Joe Gartrell from Word Mule.
Yeah, Joe was fantastic because he gave it to me straight. And the first time, and I will answer your question, I promise. But the first thing I sent him, the first manuscript I sent him was over 100,000 words, and it was just it was like this epic biopic of my life. And he came back to me and he said, this is great. It's wonderful that you're able to get all this out there, and it's cathartic, and please save it and, maybe go back and read it again for your own purposes. But you really have to decide two things. Number one, who is this book for? Who's your audience? Because you can't, if you try to write a book for everybody, you're writing a book for no one. Nobody's going to read it. So that was the first thing that he said. Second thing that he said was, what story are you actually trying to tell? What message are you trying to convey? And he was focused, and I know we'll talk about it, but he was focused on the narrative of my time in the hospital. And he said, that is really the core. That's the heart of the book is that story, that sort of timeline. So you got to figure out how to use that as kind of the nucleus and build around it. So he gave me those two thoughts. And immediately when he did that, I had two feelings. One, I was frustrated as hell because it had taken me the better part of a year and a half just to come up with the first draft. It's a slow, arduous, long, tedious process trying to write a book, as I know very well. You've written 8 or 9 of them. So I was frustrated and I was tired and I was like, my God, do I have to really go back with this thing? And then the second thing that happened was it just a light bulb went off. Once he gave me that thought, who am I writing this for? Who do I want to actually read this book? Who's going to get the most out of it? And what am I trying to say? Once he gave me that, I the first thing I did actually, Mike, was I immediately went back and rewrote the entire first chapter. And I did that in just like a couple of days because that first chapter really sets the whole tone and mood of the book and the message and the audience for the book. So that's the first thing I did. The title came just right after I wrote that first chapter, because once I wrote it, I was like, okay, so who am I writing this for? I'm writing it for guys primarily, which is, not to say that women can't read this book and get a lot out of it. They certainly can. But this is my audience. My audience is the guy who is kind of on the brink. He's kind of on the razor's edge, and a lot of things are starting to happen. Things are starting to crumble around him. Things are going sideways at work. Things are certainly going sideways in his personal life. And that was the core audience. And so the title, Conversation with a Desperate Man, just, the conversation is just the vehicle by which I'm able to tell my story and to convey to the reader the lessons that I learned along my journey. But that's how the title came about. It was right after I had determined who the audience was, and I rewrote that first chapter.
So you just packed a lot into that response there, James.
Yeah, sorry. I know.
No,
sorry.
But it bears, requires the question, how did you get there? How did you become the desperate man that you're trying to save through your story?
Mm-hmm. Well, it didn't happen right away, obviously. I mean, it happened over a period of years, really. And I think that for me, and I'll only speak for me because I certainly don't want to make generalized, overly general statements about people's experiences with anxiety and depression. But for me, it happened really over a period of years. And, a lot of it probably stems to early childhood, which is not to say that my childhood and my upbringing was abusive or anything. Quite the opposite. But it were sort of core mindsets, core kind of beliefs and ways that I viewed myself and what I thought was necessary for me to be happy and successful and to win other people's approval. That kind of stuff was the seed that was planted really early on. And after a while, your self-confidence, how you view yourself, how you relate to other people, your inability to really express your wants and needs and the things that you should have in life. That stuff just becomes, secondary. It's not what you focus on. And that's really the beginning. And it's the mindset at the very beginning of the process. Again, for me. Now,
Well, before you go on there, because you kind of just gave me a lot, so I need to pause and go back to some of it.
Sure.
You mentioned, the ways in which you viewed yourself. You talked about core mindsets. You talked about what was, necessary for you to be happy and successful and to win other people's approval. Tell me a little bit more about that and the winning other people's approval. What did you mean by that?
Sure. I think part of that mindset was real good, and part of it's real bad. The part I think that's good is that my perception about what was expected of me. Again, this was not something that was being drilled into me necessarily, although, you could argue that religious training and kind of the way that you're raised to be, a man for others, let's just say, certainly had an influence on it. The good part about it was I really did develop very early on this idea that I have a responsibility, right? I have a responsibility to other people. Now, I'm not just here to live for myself. This world does need people that are willing to go out and do things to benefit other people. I know you feel the same way, because when we grew up, we were always looking for opportunities to do volunteer work. I mean, sometimes it was voluntold work, like, we had to do it as part of our school or whatever we were doing at the time. But we really did have that mindset, and it was buttressed at home. I mean, mom and dad wanted us to be good people, and they wanted us to help other people. And so what that created in me was this idea that if I was going to be doing the right thing in a given situation, the right thing in a given situation was not to prioritize myself, but rather to look for ways that I could be helping somebody else, adding value to somebody else's life, helping them through a problem, and I know you think of yourself as a fixer too, and so do I. So, that part was positive in a sense, because we were trying to be helpful. We were trying to be charitable people. There's nothing wrong with that. It's the balance that you don't have sometimes when that's what your focus is. The really negative part of it was the validation seeking that I talked about. So think of it this way. You're not in a good mood unless the people around you are giving you kind of positive reinforcement, whether it's, you're dressing a certain way. So you want people to respond favorably to how you're dressing or how you look, your physical appearance. That's a thing a lot of kids obviously grow up struggling with, and they need that validation. If you're in a group of friends, and, I always had a pretty good number of friends growing up. I mean, it wasn't really a problem, but when I would be in those relationships, my focus would be on, how do these people feel about me? Am I living up to their expectations? Am I making choices in my life that I think these people are going to agree with? And at 46, I can tell you that kind of mindset is absolutely wrong, which is not to say that you shouldn't care about other people's opinions. I mean, we can't live in a world where all we think about are the things that we want. But again, it's about balance. And I didn't have the balance. And so I found myself at the mercy of kind of other people or other circumstances, and my emotions were going to be dictated by things outside of myself. And that's not the right way to go through life. I mean, at least in my opinion.
Well, so, I mean, you bring up a lot of good points, and there's a lot of truth in there in terms of, kind of putting other people first, kind of always kind of maybe very rarely prioritizing yourself. You ever find that you had a hard time answering the question, what do you want?
Yeah. Yep.
Why is that such a hard question to answer? Or why was it such a hard question to answer?
I think it's a combination, Mike, of feeling guilty for wanting things. I think that was part of it. The other part of it was, kind of being at war with yourself, like a little bit, like, I want to be, let's just say we're talking about personal relationships. I want to be in a personal relationship. Really? Well, why? Like, do you think that there's something missing from you, that you need to have a romantic partner in your life? And I don't, whatever stage you're at. I mean, you're in high school. I have to have, a girlfriend or a boyfriend, right? College, same thing. If I don't have it, I'm kind of missing something. And so part of it was it was the absolute wrong focus, to be focused on needing something externally instead of focusing on myself and saying, what do I need to be doing? I talk about this ad nauseum in the book, and we may talk more about it. Mission and purpose. What should I be focused on? What am I here to do for others, but for myself? That's the key.
Okay. Well, I mean, the center part of, and this is all kind of building up to something. I mean, the center part of your book, the book really revolves around your time in a psychiatric hospital.
Yeah.
What got you to that point where not that it happened overnight, but where one day you had the realization, hey, I'm spiraling out of control. I need to take a break and I need to go to this place. Like what light bulb went off in your head to get you there?
There were cracks in the dam that were starting to appear. Probably the first thing that I noticed was I wasn't sleeping. I guess that's maybe the first symptom that I can say with great certainty that started to happen. And when you don't sleep, when you don't have the ability to unplug and kind of refresh and go through the biological process of just resetting yourself every day, I know this is not medically accurate to say this, but it's just kind of my way of thinking about it. All of the crap that you deal with during the course of the day, when you don't sleep and you don't dream it out and just process it at night, and then you can wake up the next day kind of restored. When you don't do that, all the crap just continues to build up. I mean, it becomes like a clogged sewer pipe. And so, if you're asking me like what the first sign and symptom was, it was definitely lack of sleep. And then, then I was just tired all the time. And it didn't matter, I could take a sleeping pill and sleep for 12 hours and, I'd wake up and I'd still be tired. So it was a lack of sleep, fatigue, and then just the cloudy thinking, the inability to communicate clearly, the inability to think clearly and crisply. So all those things happen. And then all of the things in your life that are kind of at the root of it, and you maybe don't know it at the time, but all the things in your life at the root of it get actually significantly worse. So if it's an interpersonal relationship that's your problem, well, all of these kind of physical, psychological issues you're having they're going to exacerbate that condition. Work's going to get worse because you just don't have the ability to function well. So that's the first sign. Those were the first signs and symptoms for me. The second thing I would tell you was I had people in my life, people I worked with and people that are friends or close to me would just look at me and they'd say, you don't look right. You don't look the same. You don't have that kind of spark, that kind of, what we think of when we think of you, we don't see it. It's gone. It's not there. I had many people, and including one of the guys who helped get me into the hospital, Steve Gold, who's a friend of mine. He was one of the first people to say, and I think I quote him in the book, where he said, "You just didn't look like the person that I knew." And lastly, just to finish the thought, the last thing, Mike, and what really led me to go in the hospital was I was just having panic attacks. I was having, my blood pressure was skyrocketing. I'd go to my doctor, he'd say, "You don't have high blood pressure. We got to figure out what's going on here." They would stabilize me in the office, but those things would happen at least on a few occasions that I can think of. And he said, "We got to get this under control. This is not sustainable for you." So then it became kind of a Xanax thing. Let's do that. But ultimately, most good doctors don't think that is a long-term solution. Mine was no different. And he said, "Got to get you some to get help. You got to straighten this out.
So let's talk a little bit about kind of what's causing you to have these panic attacks and what's causing you to not be able to sleep at night. What's causing you to not be the same Jim that other people knew. Paint a picture for me of kind of what was going on in your life at the time, both at work, because I know that there were work stressors, as well as at home.
Yeah, at the time of my hospitalization, work was becoming a real problem for me. I had reached kind of a plateau. I wasn't really able to make a lot of progress, and not everybody is necessarily acquainted with the legal profession and kind of what that means. But you find that you hit a wall, and it's pretty easy to hit a wall as a lawyer. If your practice stops growing, if you stop being able to generate additional clients and grow your book of business, you plateau. If the guy or gal that you're working for, who's kind of been your mentor, decides to go and work at a different law firm, or he or she retires and you kind of lose that access, then you hit a plateau. If your practice group decides to up and leave and go to a different firm, and you're kind of left twisting in the wind, then you hit a plateau. And some combination of a lot of those things had happened during the course of my tenure, in the years sort of surrounding my hospitalization. I'd say the one thing that really stands out, though, is just some things that were happening to me kind of on a compensation level, on a policy level, that I just didn't think were right. And I had no ability to kind of do anything about it. I write in the book about not getting credit for work that I had been originating, which was a violation of our firm's policy. I should have been getting that credit, and the person that was responsible for siphoning that credit away just didn't care. I mean, didn't think anything of it, and everybody else around me was aware that this was a problem. I was aware that this was a violation, but just because of who that person was, they just didn't step in. They didn't intervene. They didn't try to change it. So at the same time that's happening, I'm getting publicly criticized by one of my superiors at the time for not growing my practice. So just think about that. I mean, I'm having work siphoned away from credit siphoned away from me. I'm losing the benefit of that origination, and at the same time, I'm having one of the big guys tell me that I'm not doing a good enough job. So what that and I know people get jerked around at work all the time, but what that really creates is a feeling of helplessness. And that's one of the main drivers. If you talk about what leads somebody to that really dark place is just feeling helpless, feeling like you don't have anywhere to go, and that nothing you do is really going to make a difference, that you're just not able to be in control of your own destiny, as it were. So that was one of the main things that was happening kind of professionally at the time.
So you've got this, I would call it a toxic work environment that you're a part of. And we will circle back to that in a moment, but that's not the only area in your life where you had some toxicity.
No, it wasn't, Mike. And it arguably the second area of my life was much worse, and in many ways, had the second area of my life been under control, I wouldn't have been, I wouldn't have had the problems I did. Okay.
So let's just go back to that for a second, Jim. You were saying that the second area of your life was much worse, and in many ways, had it been under control, you wouldn't have had as many problems as you did. You got to tell me a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I know. It was a little unclear. So I think that for guys, the two areas of their life that tend to create the biggest problems and challenges for them are their work, which I know we've started to talk about, and their personal relationships. And of personal relationships, the one that probably gets the most focus and the one that's most significant to them is the one they have with their spouse. And what I meant by that being the more significant of the two problems, I guess what I mean by that is you can certainly change jobs and find a different situation for yourself. But if your home life is stable and you're in a kind of a loving, nurturing environment where you're there for your partner and your partner's there for you, and you're both rowing the boat in the same direction downstream, when that's happening, and you're working together as a team, then the problems at work don't have the same kind of impact. You can weather those storms because you're doing it together and everybody's on board, and everybody is willing to do their part to make sure that people's needs are being met, and that you achieve as much happiness in the environment as you can. And you do that together. And that's what I meant by that. And unfortunately, in my situation, not only was work kind of a problem, and it was a significant problem, but my home situation was not good under any definition. It was not good.
Well, let's paint a picture of what not good means, Jim.
Yeah. I think the best way to describe it is that it was high conflict all the time. It didn't really matter what the issue was that was being kind of discussed in the home. So if it was the kids and their schooling, then we were on kind of a war footing with the schools. So if one of the kids is struggling in a class, then it's the teacher's fault, it's the administrator's fault. It's not the family's problem, it's not the child's problem. There's something going on there, so you have to declare war on the schools. If in family situations, and you know how I feel about our family. I mean, I'm extremely close to our family. I'm talking to you now from mom and dad's condo down in Florida, where I'm just here for a few days to help dad out in the wake of some things he's been dealing with. I'm very close. My family's always been a very important part of my life. And what happened in the aftermath after I got married, over a period of time, over a period of months and years, I really became distanced from the family. And that happened for many reasons, but the primary reason was that, my spouse just had problems with different members of our family, and hers as well. So it would be the kind of thing where if we were fighting with somebody on her side of the family, then we were a little closer to our group. If there were issues with our side of the family, then we would just float back to the other side. I'm sure there were occasions where we're fighting the battle on both fronts. And that really started to take its toll on me, because I don't know what anybody in our family could ever do to me that would ever cause me to cut off communications with them, to not be there for a graduation, a birthday party, an anniversary, a hospitalization. I don't know what anyone in our family could ever do that would cause me to do that. But the thing is, Mike, I did all of those things. I didn't go to graduations. I didn't go to birthday parties. I didn't go to anniversaries, and I didn't visit people in the hospital because I didn't feel that I was able to without creating a significant conflict in the house. And, again, going back to what we were talking about in terms of validation seeking behavior and thinking about others first, I was really focused on maintaining peace and stability in my household at any cost. And
I was curious to know, so yeah, let's play it out. For example, no, Jim, we can't go to that wedding, right?
Yeah.
What stops you from saying, hey, thank you for sharing your opinion, but this is very important for me to go to. And if you don't like it, I'm sorry about that, but you don't have to come. Like what do you think held you back from addressing that sort of part of that toxic part of your relationship dynamic?
I think that part of it was my mentality that we've already talked about putting other people first. And, if I had the personal desire to go to that wedding, just to take that example, and that's a real example, I would supplicate. I would say, okay, if that's really going to upset her, then I'm going to not do it, because it's going to create problems. So like if you play it out, Mike, you do everything that you just said, which, by the way, is absolutely the right thing to do. What you just said is absolutely the right thing to do. Having that kind of boundary, having that kind of force field around yourself that says, you know what, I don't stop becoming an individual. I don't stop being a person with wants, needs, and desires just because I'm in this relationship. That does not happen. So you're absolutely right. What stopped me from doing it was, again, thinking about other people, wanting to maintain the peace, and being having the experience of having done that and all of the negative consequences that flow from it. So you assert yourself, you make that decision, and then you know what happens? What happens is days, weeks, and months of conflict. And it's going back and it's cherry picking, and it's going back and it's saying, well, you left me alone for 3 days while you went to that wedding. Yeah, but you could have gone to the wedding. Well, I didn't want to go to it's just, it's like,
and Jim, realize I'm not saying this as a point of criticism. I'm actually saying it as a point of curiosity, and on a much smaller scale, I can relate to that too. I mean, I think there's something about our personalities where we don't want to rock the boat.
Yeah.
Where we're very nervous about rocking the boat, and there's I'm sure all sorts of reasons why we are like that, or we were like that. But what I'm more curious about actually is, when you start asserting yourself, let's say let's say you had to learn some tools, right? You had to learn some tools for pushing back and having your voice heard as part of the relationship dynamic. When you make a change like that, where you go from being, I don't want to say the word pushover is not the right word, but when you go from being like a yes man, or, putting yourself last, to standing up for yourself a bit, what happens then? Like what does all hell break loose? Is there, what are the repercussions of that?
You mean what happens after you decide to join the military after 20 years of trying, and what's the aftermath of that decision, Mike? Is that what you're saying?
That's a very specific example which we need to talk about.
Yeah.
Which is a very important part of your story. But more so, you realize that you have to make a change because your own happiness is at stake. Your own health is at stake. Right. When you start to put the seeds of change in motion. And again, this is, not as big as joining the military, but, when you start pushing back a little bit, saying, hey, you know what, you're wrong about this, or it's very important for me to go to this, family event, this family reunion or whatever. What happens then? Like what's the fallout?
The fallout is, again, it's just a repeated, it's just ongoing conflict. It's ongoing finger pointing. It's, waking up at 2:00, being woken up at 2:00 in the morning and being, criticized for having made that decision, and being made to feel guilty about having made that decision. Like, how dare you think of yourself and be so selfish? We never see you because you work so hard. Meanwhile, you're working so hard so that you can, afford to do all the things that everyone expects you to do. But how dare you abandon us? What am I supposed to do? How am I supposed to handle all this by myself? That kind of thing. So when you do what you're suggesting and you assert yourself, It's absolutely the right thing to do. But think of it this way: not asserting yourself and not having those boundaries and not making yourself a priority, that'll kill you. It'll take, it may take a while. It'll eventually kill you. And asserting yourself and taking those kinds of actions to prioritize your wants and needs, that's the right thing to do, but it's going to create a lot of stress. It's going to create a lot of conflict, especially if you're in this kind of a high conflict relationship. It's going to happen. And, for me, it was this choice between the slow death and something that was going to really hit me very, very hard, very, very fast. And I was going to, I may not have made it out of that either, but it's like, you got to make the choice. Like I'm thinking like, my whole book is stupid movie metaphors, right? So I'm Skywalker, I'm up on the tower. All right. I could go with him, grab the hand, and then my life's over because I've made that horrible choice. Or I can throw myself off the tower. I have no idea what the hell's down there. No idea if I'm going to land safely or if I'm just going to, it's going to be over for me. And I think that's the choice that you're making of going along, supplicating, not asserting yourself, not, taking that step and prioritizing somebody else. It's going to make you miserable. So you're going to grab the hand and go, or you can take that leap. You can say, no, this is my life. I have to do this. And you're going to throw yourself off the tower. I don't know what's going to happen after that. So that's kind of how I think about it.
So, I mean, the picture of your life that you've been painting is, on one hand, you've got a very toxic work environment. You're being asked, why aren't you growing your business? And then somebody is basically siphoning off your bookings. So that's creating a hell of sorts, and probably makes you want to, knock your head into the wall. Yeah. Then at home, you've got another situation that's happening, and this isn't to pick on anyone in particular, but I'm just trying to paint the picture of your life. Where, what's going on at home is untenable as well. I mean, there's not a lot of fairness there. You're getting a tremendous amount of stress from your home life, which kind of leads you, it leads you to this, sort of trajectory where at some point you're going to break. And that's when the anxiety attacks are happening. And that's when you're winding up at the doctor's office. That's when you're, needing, blood pressure issues, therapists, et cetera. Do I have that right? I mean, is that where we are right now?
Yeah, pretty much exactly where you are. The body's always going to correct. The body's not going to let you get away with it forever. Like, I mean, you got a mind, and the mind is a wonderful thing. The mind can build rocket ships. The mind can think about, solar cars and whatever the hell. I mean, the mind can do a lot of brilliant, wonderful, amazing things. The thing that it really can't do ultimately is you can't think your way out of something like this. It's just not going to work. So the stuff's going to weigh down on you. You're going to be emotionally just depleted. And, as I talk about in the book, there's very real physical consequences to this kind of thing. Your body will ultimately break down. And in some ways, it's a good thing. In some ways, you have to break down sometimes. If you're like me or how I was, and you're going to put everybody first and put yourself last all the time, which my psychiatrist always said was going to lead me to a breakdown. It's helpful when your body does that, because then you don't have a choice. Okay, then it becomes like, this is not something that I have to make. I don't have to make the decision to go into the hospital. I'm going. I'm going. And so you're right. I mean, it's inevitably what happens to you.
So this is where we end part one. Well, now, of course, we covered a lot of ground there. And in the second interview, and you just heard Jim talk about, he referenced his joining the military, which is a huge turning point in his life. And this is where I wanted to cut the interview, because that in and of itself is its own story. And it's a very important part of Jim's story. So tune in on Friday, and you're going to hear that second part of kind of what happened when he joined at 40 years old, 39. He's commissioned as a first lieutenant in the Army, he joins the JAG Corps, Army Reserve. And you'll hear about the impact that had on his marriage as well as his career. And again, that will air on Friday. So thank you for listening. If you want to share this episode with a friend, I'd certainly appreciate that. Very powerful story. If you know somebody who could benefit by hearing it, please don't hesitate to share. Also, if you like what you hear here, of course, go to iTunes, go to wherever you get your podcasts, and like us. And what is that called? Subscribe. That's the word I'm looking for. Subscribe. And yeah, that's it. We'll see you on Friday with the second half of Jim's story. And just to tease it, you hear him cry a couple times during that story. So hey, you don't want to miss that. But for all of the hardworking men and women and dogs over at Uncorking a Story, this is Mike Carlon saying thank you very much for listening, and we'll be back on Friday.